I'd just like to say hi and welcome to everybody that's joining in. I got a couple people trickling in here. I'm excited if we have anybody coming from last week. We're going to dive into a few things. I'm going to touch base on some stuff that we talked about last week in our intro, or sort of tips and tricks for the quotes page. If you weren't able to catch us last week, don't worry. It's recorded. It's posted on LinkedIn. We're also going to be throwing it up on our YouTube page, Paperless Parts on YouTube. Feel free to watch that. Give me the feedback. I just want to start off by saying thank you to everybody who showed up today as well as last week. I know a couple of you had reached out post the webinar, asked a few more follow-up questions. I have those tracked. I have those written down. I will send a follow-up email to all the everybody that registered for that last webinar, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Of course, don't worry, I'm not going to call out anybody that asked specific questions, but we had a lot of really awesome feedback, and it was cool. It was our first one. We just touched base on a really basic feature that we built, that quotes homepage and why we built it, and some of the things that, some of the thought process that we had when we were building that page out. So again, I'm going to wait one more minute. Last time we waited and people trickled in before the registration closed. I know a lot of you signed up, so I don't want to close out the broadcast too soon. So I'm going to wait just one more minute. Again, feel free to start posting your questions, and I can answer them if they come in. If not, then we'll roll into it in about a minute. So thank you again. And per some of the feedback we got last week, I upgraded my microphone. So if you can't hear me, or maybe you can hear me too well and you can hear a little bit of a raspiness in my voice, there is a little bit of construction going on outside our office as well. So if you do hear some jackhammering or trucks backing up, that is just the wonderful city of Boston. All right, so 1:02 Eastern Standard Time. I just want to say welcome to everybody. This is our second webinar for Paperless Parts. The goal of our webinar series is kind of a combination of two things. Our onboarding process that we've built out here takes into account some specific requests, as well as it has a really short timeline, and we pack a lot of things in there. So with all the people that are coming to the platform, my team is absolutely stuffed. They're on the phone pretty much the whole day, as well as giving video trainings. So I decided to step back and say, I'm going to start recording some of these webinar series. We're going to pass these off to people in the onboarding process to help relieve some of the efforts on my team's part, as well as just get as many people involved as we can. So based off of everyone that registered, we have some people that are in the sales funnel. Welcome. I know you guys may have not seen Paperless Parts before. If you have had a demo from our awesome sales team, then you're going to see some similar ideas, but you're also going to be able to hear a lot about why we built specific things. And in case you do, and I'm hoping you do, come join the platform, you'll be a step ahead of everybody else. So welcome to those who are in the sales funnel. I see a lot of our current users, new teammates of current users as well. So instead of having your team train you up, you can always add another seat and tell them to come to a webinar series, and we'll just kind of go through a few things. So with that, we're going to talk about configuring a process today in Paperless Parts. Last week, we touched base on the quotes homepage, and sort of the idea of our thought process, tracking quote transparency in the customer experience funnel. And today we're going to kind of take it a step deeper and understand how to set up a process, how to configure one in Paperless Parts, as well as just kind of some general best practice, where to find certain buttons. I love when people reach out to our support hotline or our chatbot. We're all for helping everybody on the platform, but if I can train you guys, then it's a little less time out of your day to reach out to us. So without further ado, we'll sort of dive into how to configure a process in Paperless Parts and just sort of some tips and tricks for that. So the screen we're looking at right now is the Processes tab in Paperless. So when you sign in, you're going to come to the quotes homepage, or the quotes dashboard. We walked through these tabs last week. Awesome feedback. Again, thank you to everybody that sent in their comments and their questions. One of the things that I wanted to touch base and sort of connect the dots to is when we looked at a quote last week, there's the concept of picking a process for drafting a quote. Right now, there's two different processes you can pick from. A lot of people were saying, well, what about other capabilities that we offer besides what we saw last week or besides what we've been talking about in the sales process? So what we're going to talk about right now is what is a process, right? So we're now on the processes page. We have operations and processes. What a process is intended to be is essentially a bucket. And I like to think of it almost as a situation as well as a manufacturing capability that you want to offer, whether it's internally, you want to quote with it, or it's externally and you want to have it on your smart RFQ form. So what I mean by a situation is you can set up a process and call it anything you want, right? So we have two distinct processes set up here. One's called CNC, one's called generic. You can come into this page and you can set up essentially a bucket process and call it whatever you would like. So we're just going to, for the sake of the demo, for the sake of the webinar, we're going to call this one CNC number 3. There's two distinct processes you can pick from, generic or CNC. So generic is any other process besides lathe and mill. So whether it's wire ADM, whether it's any sort of additive, sheet metal fabrication, assembly, powder coating, you name it. That would be a generic process. For this one, we're going to use a CNC process because that allows us to call some distinct variables in our pricing formulas, which is a different webinar that we'll jump into in a couple of weeks. So what we did here is we created a bucket. A bucket consists of multiple different operations that are also defined by whatever it is you want. So let's jump into one to kind of go a little bit further. We're in a CNC process, right? So the idea here is that you create a bucket that has a template that allows you to quote as quickly and as effectively as possible by sort of pre-populating different steps and not having to add them as often. So if we work our way through a process, and we're gonna kind of go through how to configure this in a sort of a streamlined, smart, best practice way. So kind of working our way down, we've created a CNC process. We have an internal display name, and then we have an external display name. External is going to go on anything that is customer facing. Order documents, invoices, thank you for completing a shipment. Any document generated from paperless parts is going to display this name, and if there's nothing, it's going to default to the internal process name. So some people might come in here and just say, I'm going to call this mill. And they're going to have my external process name, and they're going to call it CNC machining. So now, not only on my RFQ form is it called CNC machining, which is very customer friendly, very user front or user forward. Everybody understands what process they're picking, but every document that goes out is going to have CNC machining. Versus internally, it may be a little bit easier for your guys, whether it's on the estimating team or whether it's on the shop floor or whoever's building out the quote, to just pick the mill process. Moving to the right, we have two other distinct variables we can sort of define in this template. We have a standard lead time to start our lead time calculation off of. So you could come in here and say my standard lead time for CNC machining is 25 days. And if you call out added lead times and other things like material or an operation itself, we'll add those days to this standard lead time. So if you were to select A36 steel in the quoting process and it had an added lead time of 1 day, you'll notice that on the calculated lead time in paperless parts, it's going to be 26 if those were the only two variables that were involved. So the other variable we have is yield. So a lot of people say, I operate at a 98 or 95 or even 90, depending on your shop, per yield percentage. And that allows you to scale the make quantity across the requested quantities for a specific quote. So if you operate at a 98% yield, maybe at a quantity of 1, there may not be a make quantity difference, but as you go to 2, 3, 5, 50, all the way up to 100, you'll notice that the make quantity for while you're building out the quote is going to be 1 to 2 to 3, 5, 7, 9 more than the requested quantity. Does that make sense? Awesome. I'm getting some questions populating in my my Q&A box already. So I will be sure to field those when we take a little bit of a Q&A break in a couple minutes. So next is materials. So when you are building out a quote and you have this process selected, you have the mill process picked, you're going to have a drop down that allows you to pick the associated material that came from the RFQ if it didn't come from your smart RFQ form and automatically drafted. So you can come in here, you can come to the materials tab. If it's not already in your default template, you can just start searching. So you'll be able to pretty much find any material that you want. And if there isn't one, you can always reach out to our support hotline or our chat bot in the bottom right-hand corner down here and just say, hey guys, there's a material that I just had an RFQ for. Do you mind adding it? We can add it within a couple of minutes. So you can come in here. I started typing in stainless. I'm gonna pick 15.5. I'm gonna hit create. And now that is going to be added to my materials list. These are alphabetical. Oh, great question. Someone else just said, what are the variables for materials? So we have 3 distinct variables that you call out for a material that you add. We have a custom material name. We know that some people like to call materials something other than what our master list has. Yes, it may be the same thing, but if you wanted to call it, A36 steel dash custom because you had to do something to it, you'd be able to come in here, create a custom name, and now this material on any customer facing documents will use your custom name here. What about the RFQ form? Another great question. So any custom name that you have will automatically be displayed on the RFQ form. So you can call it gray, you can call it black, you can call it custom, you can call it pre-finished, whatever you see fit. Any custom name for a material is going to be displayed on the RFQ form. Last but not least, we have I'm going to get an error message here for custom material name. All right, so last but not least, we have supplier cost. So we understand that you're not going to come in here and adjust the supplier cost for material every time you see or you go look at the market price for A36 steel. What our thought process is here is give us a starting point. Give our algorithm a starting point to back into a material cost for the part. All right, so you can come in here and you can just put an average cost that you've paid for over the past couple of months. That way you're not scrambling around, because if it was set at 0, obviously it's not going to have a very accurate material price. But if you give it just a generic, I pay anywhere from $250 to $335. You can say, okay, $3 per pound for A36 is going to be a good general starting point for me to calculate material cost. Awesome. A couple of questions roll in, that's okay. So we have quite a bit of materials added for this specific process. Again, we are in a mill process. So the next thing that we run into is two distinct tables that you can add to a process that you created. So right before we came to this page, I had mentioned that you can create one of these processes for 2 real reasons. One is you want to offer all the manufacturing capabilities that you have in-house that you want to display to the public or quote with. So again, CNC milling, if you had lathe, if you had wire EDM, sheet metal, any sort of additive, laser water jet cutter, laser water jet, you name it. You can create a process for that. But the other side of it is you can create a process for the sake of a situation. So if you always find yourself picking between, or let's say drafting a quote with our CNC process and then adding operations to it, but you don't want to create a whole nother, you don't want to alter the template that you've already created, then you can create a process that's very situation specific. So if you get the part file and you see, okay, I'm going to have to use these steps in order to create the part, I'm going to pick my CNC number 2 process because I know that the template that we're about to create, which I'll show you guys, has the steps that are necessary to create the part. So what do I mean by template? Number 1 is someone just asked that, Riley, what do you mean by template? What I mean by template is you can come in here and these are operations, right? So Paperless has 2 distinct tabs in the process tabs, process and operations. Operations are all the pieces that go inside of a bucket, and that bucket is a process. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just sort of sit down and think about what's the most common flow you use when you're quoting a part, right? So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you get an RFQ or when you get a part file and you say, okay, what do I want to account for first when it comes to the quoting process? So first thing that we're going to look at is material. So we're going to come down here, and again, all these operations are going to be built out in your account setup process for those of you that are still in the sales funnel, because again, I just got another great question is where did these come from? So these operations are either going to be pre-populated depending on the information that you provided during your onboarding process, or if you didn't provide any information, you're going to see our generic template of operations that we've built out internally that we think best suit a manufacturer. We know that they're not going to be custom and they're not going to be absolutely tuned to your shop, but we kind of took what we call a 30,000 foot approach to creating operations that get the job done, and they allow you to really seamlessly understand the process. So these in specific, these were uploaded to this specific account, but we're going to go through and just sort of add them as if we were going to quote a part, right? So the first thing that most people look at is they're going to add a material op. And this material op that I'm picking is called material by pound rectangular. So we're going to look at a rectangular bar, and the distinct factor that's going to drive this material price is the cost per pound. The next thing that I'm going to think about is I got to know that the lady at the front desk is going to gather all the information. She's going to, organize the quote, so to speak, write some stuff down, put it in our shared drives, put it in our Z drives. And I want to account for that. I want to make sure that that cost, because she is being paid and she is spending time on it, is accounted for. So we're going to do a little bit of an what we call admin, which is really simple. It's just a rate times time. And when that time is determined by you, or it's set as a default. So this is, I think, just a default 30 minutes at $20 an hour. So pretty easy. Next, after admin it's going to move over to programming, right? So we're going to call out programming. And a lot of people say, I tuck programming up with my setup costs. Well, the big part about paperless is we're going to give you the ability to really see how those costs line out in the quoting process. So by calling out programming, you're able to say, okay, if those quantity breaks from 1 all the way up to 500 or 600, you're not going to price programming the same for the quantity of 1 or 2 as you are for the quantity of 250 to 500. When you get to those higher quantity breaks, you're going to understand that you can adjust the programming rate or time spent programming to be a little bit more, because you're going to really dial in that process in order to most effectively and efficiently make those requested quantities. So again, we're going to call out programming. We're going to keep it separate for the sake of just seeing the cost behind it. So next we're going to go to actual milling operation, right? So it's the operation that's going to give us our setup. If you're using our runtime algorithms, it's going to display a runtime depending on the geometric interrogation done on the part, as well as some variables that are inside the operation. So things like percent attendance, how many people are at the machine, the efficiency, as well as some other variables. So we're going to add a milling with estimates. So now we have material by pound rectangular bar, admin, programming, milling with estimates. After that, we're going to do a QA step. So we're going to get it off the machine. We're going to check it out, make sure everything looks good. And then we're going to do a shipping prep. So any sort of last and if or buts is what I call them. We're going to get the part looking good. We're going to get it ready for shipping, and we're going to call that out as a specific operation because it is extremely time consuming to go through all the parts. And this operation can be quantity driven. These are totally up to you how you want to price these. These are just the templated ones that we're using. So we're going to come down here. We're going to hit save. Now we have what we call an operations template for our CNC process. Another great question. I said five people ask, what if I have a different operation come up during the quoting process? Again, perfect example. What our thought process is here by having a template is we want to save you clicks, right? So what is the high level thought process when you're quoting? Get those operations in, make sure they populate every single time. And you don't have to add them as you're building out a quote, because if you had to add each one of these every time you're building a quote, it'd be a little bit annoying. It'd be a little bit time consuming. So use the 30,000 foot view, add the ones that you want to account for every single time. And then when you're building out the quote, add the other ops right within the quote item itself, because it's very specific to that geometry or it's very specific to that quote item. Awesome. Great. That was good. So next is finishes. So you can get a request, or you can get a requested finish from an RFQ as well as from any other excuse me, you can get a request for finish from our Smart RFQ form, as well as just any other RFQ coming into your shop. So when you pick this process and you upload a part and you're building a quote, there'll be a box to pick an associated finish, right? Because you're going to have to reach out to outside services. Maybe you do certain ones internally, but that there is a cost associated with that. So you can come in here. This is the same operations list that we were just looking at, but now we're going to add all the finish operations that we created, which again is something that we'll get from you during the onboarding process. And we're going to add those to this specific process because we know certain finishes are only available to certain processes or certain materials. So we can come in here, we can just call out the ones that we want to add. So we're going to add a couple different anodizing, do a chrome for yellow, a custom painting, electroless nickels, a super popular one. Come down here, we'll do a passive, oxide black, just what we call standard, and maybe a zinc clear. So we're going to add those finishes to our template. Another good question. You guys are just crushing it with the questions today. I love it. That's why we have these webinar series. So are these going to populate? They're not. So these are going to be what's available to be picked from. So they're not going to be showing up every time. That'd be a pain to go ahead and delete all these. But when you have the finish drop down in paperless parts, there'll be a little box. You can click it and you can select the finish that's associated with that quote item. So what available finishes are going to be on this CNC process that we created, or CNC machining process that we created? All the ones that we just picked. And where did these come from? Well, they came from you during the onboarding process at Paperless Parts. So if you provided them to us on a exported CSV or just a list, we'll go in and we'll create an operation and we'll create a finish op. What are they? Another great question. It is this really simple formula, and it can be as complex as you want, but the generic formula that comes with a finish op is a lot price and then a piece price over the lot. So we'll do essentially a multiplication. It's just simple math, no magic is what I call it. It's my latest slogan. Is we're looking at how many quantity is requested times the piece price. If it doesn't exceed the lot charge, we'll default to the lot charge. If the quantity requested times the piece price exceeds the lot charge, then we'll go with that price. So super easy. And those are completely customizable. So if you want to set a different lot charge and different piece price for every finish option you have, send that over in the CSV during the onboarding process or now if you're on our platform already. And we can make sure we get those uploaded for you. So last but not least is our Smart RFQ form. So again, during the onboarding process, we ask and we talk about how you host your website. And if the Smart RFQ form is something you're interested in, we have had probably the most impact and influential product that I love to work with. And it's called our Smart RFQ form. And this is placed, for those of you that are in the sales funnel that are listening in, this is placed on your website, right in the, could be on the contact page. We'll sometimes create a new page called Request for Quote. And it's the gateway into paperless parts. Customers don't know that you're using paperless. It's completely white labeled to your shop. And what they're able to do is come in here. They're able to pick a process. So the processes that they'll see are all the ones that have this checkbox on them. So if that checkbox is on, they'll be able to pick a CNC machining process. They'll be able to upload their parts, whether they're PDFs or 3D models. They'll be able to pick a material, and that material will be one of the ones that are available right here. They'll be able to pick a available finish. They won't see any of the operations. They'll only be able to see material and finish. They'll pick a finish of the list that you see right here. They'll be able to write in any extra notes. Maybe this requires special packaging. Can you please reach out after you get this quote? And then last but not least, they'll be able to say where they heard about you guys, because our thought process here is you deserve to know where these people are coming from. So sorry, quick diversion. That was more focused on everybody that's in the sales funnel. And then for those of you that are on the platform, you may have been here long enough where you know that this button hasn't always been here. But if this is new to you, come into your processes page, scroll down to the bottom, and you can toggle a specific process on and off of your Smart RFQ form. So super awesome feature. We've had a lot of great feedback about it. And I encourage, if anybody has any more feedback about it, just send it on over via email, or you can drop it in the QA channel right now. Awesome. So what about operations? That was I had that question probably 8 or 9 times during that little spiel. So we're back on the processes page. And again, if you guys do have any questions, please just keep sending them over. And if I don't get to answering all of them, I will answer them in an email and send them back to you. So other side of things is operations, because this was the list we were looking at, which a lot of people had asked where these came from. So we build these out for you during the onboarding process, and then we fine tune them in our 3 to 6 week sort of what I call 3 different phases of onboarding. And then after that, it's totally up to you how you want to customize them. You can reach out to me and my team, and we'll come in here and we'll help you define specific things, or you can create them yourself. So with that, let's go and check one out. I think admin's got one. Excuse me, let me jump into which one do I think would be a good one. We can do milling with estimates. So very similar mindset to how certain people may have quoted things in the past or other products they may have used. But the unique part about Paperless is this is 100% customizable to how you want to do it, right? So an operation is kind of like a work center if you are an ERP person. But what we've done is we have given you the ability to essentially come in here and define pricing inputs 100% up to how you want to define them. So if you step back and I assume there's no one here that could tell me of a platform, especially an ERP, that allows you to adjust the formula that does the math when you put in inputs in your ERP, right? You can put as many inputs in as you want. You can change percentage attended, you can change efficiency, you can change crew. Like I totally get that. I've explored those, but the actual formula that is behind the scenes that's doing the math is completely hidden, right? There's no way to see it. There's no way to access it. And we wanted people to have the ability to see those formulas and play with them and adjust them and write rules depending on geometry and depending on different dimensions of a 3D model, right? So that's where this gets really, really, really powerful. Not scary, which is another thing. We don't want this to come off as hard to work with. We have an awesome team that'll help you, but again, so we'll just kind of show you guys what that looks like, just so you really understand the brains of Paperless and what I mean by an operation, because I keep having more people ping me about what these are. So again, an operation, it's a series of different custom pricing inputs that allow you to do a mathematical formula while calling different geometric attributes from a 3D model, or if you put in manual attributes for a PDF. Is that a good explanation? Yeah, I've gotten a bunch of thumbs up on the verbiage of that one, so I'm going to count that as a win in my book. But what this is, and again, there are a series of different pricing inputs that are defined by you. And what I mean they're defined by you is you can come in here and you can see our pricing language that we've created for these operations. So this one in specific, they have some notes up here just from our generic template, just to talk about, what it is we used and what the thought process was. Where we're defining some units up here. We're calling a specific interrogation method that we created. And then we have a series of different variables that we defined. So you don't have to use these. They come with our generic processes, but you can call them whenever you want. So again, this is completely hidden in most ERP systems or any other quoting softwares. But we said, why not give the power to the user, right? If you're paying for our platform, you should have complete control over how it works and make it completely custom to your manufacturing capabilities and processes. So you can call out pretty much anything. It's basically a shell of Python for those of you that are in the computer world or the coding world. I'm certainly not. I can understand this stuff because it's kind of my job, but anything more than this, and I'm going to probably pass you off to one of our dev team guys, and he can answer any questions for you. So with that, I just got a funny look from him in the other room. So with that, you can see that we're using if functions and if and else functions to sort of give ourselves some guidelines where we can write different rules and different parameters in order to basically use different variables. So you can always get pretty creative with it. And another great question just rolled in twice, actually. Oh, nope, 4 different times. Four people just asked it. And I always get distracted. I apologize with the Q&A. I love making sure I can answer everybody's questions super fast. But if you don't understand how to make these variables talk to one another, it's super, super easy. So you can come down here to our help docs, and you can come in here, and we have literally defined exactly how we wrote and created all this specific pricing language. We define what attributes you can call out, what they do, the units they're in, additive, cast urethane, wire EDM, sheet metal. We have example operations if you're curious of how to set up something just so it works. So the power is 100% in your hands, which is really, really, really cool, and part of the paperless platform that I personally love working with our users on is coming in here and starting to ask really unique questions. For example, another sidetrack. A couple weeks ago, sheet metal shop that we work with, awesome group of guys over there. They realized that for certain size projects, there's certain size parts that they're working on, it requires 2 people, right? 2 people have to carry it around the shop. So the summed amount of time that they carry it around the shop adds up, right? So let's say there's a bunch of parts being made. Every time they have to carry that part around the shop, it's a couple of minutes. It can add up to a couple of hours times the labor rate of those guys. In the shop owner's mind, that's something he wanted to account for. So we created him an operation that was driven by the part dimensions that were uploaded. So really, really cool. We said if the part dimensions exceed a certain length, we're now able to take the associated labor rate of those 2 guys, and guess what? Multiply it by 2, because there's now 2 of them. There's not just 1 of them walking that specific part around. Now, if that part was less than the defined max length, it's only going to use a labor rate times 1 instead of times 2. So that's the power of paperless parts, and that's the really, really, really fun conversations that I get to have and my team gets to have with you guys. For those of you that are in the sales funnel, with you during our second phase of onboarding, after we get all these things input and defined, and we start having conversations about them. We can get super, super, super in depth and really tune in your quoting process. So it's what we call safeguarded, right? So different things and different variables have what I call, the safeguards on them. So you never have to worry about missing when it comes to the quoting process. So that is kind of how to configure a process in paperless. Is when it comes to questions. I know we had a few questions about which one? How do I set up a sheet metal process? Awesome. Really, really good question. Current user too. Welcome. Hi. So the sheet metal process is super easy. So you can come in here, you can hit new process. Since it's not going to be CNC or it's going to be generic, we're going to call it sheet metal. It's now added. If you want to offer it on your smart RFQ form without even doing any materials and available finishes, you can always just come in here, call it that, so people can pick it. They won't have any options to pick from, so they'll just have to submit the parts and maybe give you a call, or you'll give them a call. But you can always, come in here. You've created a sheet metal process bucket. You can set a standard lead time, let's say 34 days. It's kind of a weird one. We can come in here. We can do stainless. Again, I apologize if I'm not picking the industry correct material for this, but for the sake of the example, put in a material. If you don't want to worry about cost right now, because you're always going to get an outside RFQ and you're going to put in the true cost of material in paperless parts, don't worry about filling this in. You don't have to. You can come in, you can add the operations you see necessary. So we can go admin. Maybe you're going to do a Q&A check just to look at the part itself, make sure everything that you have is available. We can do material by sheet. We can do material by area. It's up to you, depending on which one you prefer. And then we can go down here. I'm pretty sure we have a sheet metal op set up. If we don't, I apologize. Oh, we can do forming. I guess that'll work for now. And then we can do a shipping prep. So now this process set up, it has the operations. You can come in here and you can always see what the operation is defined as. If you were kind of curious, maybe it's set up as a generic template. This one in specific is a material operation, so it calls out a few different things. We're able to tell you how many of that specific part uploaded fits in a sheet, how many sheets are in total, the sheet width and length. You can define those here. So this is what we're going to default to. If you want to say, no, Riley, I'm going to use a different size sheet, come in here and change it. You have a price per sheet. So if you want to change that on a quote by quote basis, leave it at 0 and do it when you're building out the quote. If you always want to have one set up that's default, come in here and make it default. So now you have that sheet metal process set up. What if, oh, another great question. What if I don't have an operation set up? So you can always come into your operations list. You can scroll down, you can see new operation. You can call it whatever you would like. So I'm just going to call it new op. If you want it associated with the machine, you can come in here, you can pick a specific machine that allows you to use different variables in the op itself, kind of the code we were looking at earlier. So if you are an additive individual, you can call out a specific 3D printer. You can come in here, pick a actual manufacturer, and then a specific printer itself. And then hit create. And you're going to see it down here. So there's not going to be any pricing inputs in a newly created operation, because this is kind of at the point where either A, you reach out to your customer success manager and you have the conversation around how to define this op, what it is you're trying to achieve with this operation, or you come over to our help documents and you write the op yourself. Awesome. Any other questions? There's a few on here that I don't know if I can answer off the top of my head, but I have the right people in the room just outside the door from me that can answer them. A little more technical. I'm just trying to keep it as sort of high level and streamlined as possible, but I can follow up with you guys about those ones post the webinar series. So again, guys, the focus that I want to have here and the concept of these webinar series is to make sure that everybody in our onboarding funnel is able to have access to, whether it's just some high level knowledge or just some training, because their CSM has a training for next Monday and they really want to just check something out today. So they can always come and join the webinar series or watch them. They're going to be hosted right in our resources page here, I think on Monday or Tuesday of next week. So I'm new to the webinar thing. We've had unbelievable turnout and I love it and it's exciting. But if you guys have any feedback, I'm big on feedback. This is how I'm going to get better. This is how I'm going to drive the topics that you guys want to hear about. So feel free to either send it in the feedback section, in the Q&A section, shoot me an email, Riley@paperlessparts. Just throw your name in the subject line or wherever, just so I know who you are. And then yeah, I'm happy to answer anybody else's questions. So guys, thank you so much for jumping on for webinar number 2, how to configure a process. If you're in the sales funnel, I hope to see your name popping up on my calendar soon. Our team is really, really crushing it here. And if you're a current user, thank you so much for coming on and taking a couple of minutes out of your day. This was live, but it's going to be recorded, so it'll be populated here in the Paperless platform. Thank you, everyone, and I'll talk to you soon.